Moving next to Fisheries Management Committee, Commissioner McMillan.
Okay, at this time I'd like to ask Frank Fisk, Assistant Chief of Fisheries, to present the guide license update.
Commissioner. I'll know the password. Thanks, Jason. See through all this other stuff here. I need Steve's glasses before it's over here. All right. At the last commission meeting, I presented a summary of a general fishing guide license, and at that meeting, the decision process on this got honed down to represent just trout tailwaters that would need this guide license. So the why license is to increase revenue for TWRA's management of the resource and to ensure that guides are contributing more to the resources that they use for commercial benefit. This trout tailwater license would apply to our main tailwaters. I believe I have 10 dams listed here. There are places like the Caney Fork River, Clinch River, Hiwassee, and places where we also stock hundreds of thousands of trout every year. A guide would be anyone that advertises, offers, or provides their services for compensation to direct, instruct, or aid others in attempting to take fish in these locations. And I'm sure this definition will need some tweaking as we move forward. There are basically three alternatives that I want to present today. The first is no change, leave it as it is. The second would be to require a guide license in these locations with no other qualifications, just buy it. And then the third would be a guide license that we would offer to guides that meet specific criteria. First would be the no change. We see the benefits of the existing system is that guides can operate as they currently do without additional cost. I guess that'd be a guide benefit. TWRA benefits from this as well, and that there are more people advertising fishing opportunities in Tennessee and bringing more out-of-state anglers in to fish. There's no additional administrative or enforcement requirements for TWRA the way it is now. And the agency has minimal exposure to liability of matters between guides and clients. If there's an issue right now between in this business, we have the luxury of sending them to the Better Business Bureau on these issues. That could change the more we get into that, so we see that as a benefit as it is now. But the cost is we may be leaving some revenue on the table by not capitalizing on this. Alternative two would be to require guides to purchase a commercial license. I'm talking about a 1-year license in this example. Our current commercial license is $200 and $1,000 for out of state, and this license could be purchased at any license agent. A little bit of background on that. First of all, it is what we charge for our current commercial license holders, and it also reflects pretty well in the data that we gathered from our fishermen that we surveyed. You see here, $200 falls in, certainly there's less interest in anything above this bar, drops off precipitously. For the out-of-state, the non-resident, the mode of this histogram barely covers the $1,000 mark. So I don't think we're too far out of line with these numbers. And also you have to keep in mind if we charge too little, say a $50 license, or some states charge a $10 and $25 license for their in-state, we don't feel that we would be able to support that program with just that little amount coming in. Let's talk a little more about this second alternative. Again, this is no qualifying criteria. At present, we can argue all day about how many guides there are that fish for trout in Tennessee. We don't know, but from my experience with trout tailwaters and others in the rooms, we know that there's certainly less than 200. I mean, there's probably 100 in-state, there may be 100 out-of-state. right now, and that may be generous. Other states that sell guide licenses for all fish species barely break 40 out-of-state guides typically. So well, we have a lot of our waters poised on state boundaries, so we would expect to see a little bit more. I think that once we start charging, that number is going to drop a bit. Some amount, I think it's reasonable to say that we would have somewhere in the vicinity of, now this is just trout guides again, 75 and 50 non-residents. If you do the math on those cost figures, that is a revenue of $65,000. Again, this is purchased at the real system, so it only costs us about $1 a license, really a nominal fee. And this increase here is, back up, some increase to services and enforcement is really the great unknown here. We don't know how much it will cost us in working on this program, depending on how complicated it is. We probably won't be hiring anyone else to do this, so it's going to be taking away from other things that we do and think are important. Again, that's just the benefits of this alternative 2 would be perhaps $65,000. And another benefit to the guides and out-of-state anglers would be that we could post a list of guides if they chose to be on our list on a website somewhere and give them a little bit of advertising. So my experience in trying to find guides for the initial survey was that it was pretty difficult. You'd think it'd be a lot easier given the internet today. So some of the costs associated with this alternative 2 is that there's potential loss of resources if we get bogged down in a lot of phone calls about my guide did this, or do I really need a guide license if I'm just buying gas for my buddy? All these sorts of things will tie up our phone lines a little more, create questions for officers. So I would expect that to be spread out across the agency, but it'll certainly distract us from doing other things that we should be doing on a given day. Alternative 3 is a guide license with qualifying criteria. Because there would be additional materials that would have to be verified, they would have to be purchased at our TWRA offices, so the guide would have to drive to one of our 4 offices. Our TWRA clerks would review the information, their qualifying materials, and create an actual paper file on that person in our office somewhere. So all that's taken a little bit of time and materials. Our proposed qualifying criteria right now, we think we certainly should run a background check on someone if we're going to go to this trouble. That would capture wildlife violations as well as I guess general criminal violations. We've talked about and not talked about insurance coverage. I did a little research on insurance. If you were to buy insurance through one of the larger agents in Nashville, it's an independent firm, the minimum premium is $1,000. So you can pay out of pocket $1,000 to start, and that'll get you $1 million coverage. And they as well have criteria that require first aid and some of the things I'll talk about in a minute. But that's a negotiable point. All this is just for your consideration, of course. The other thing that we think we should include in alternative 3 would be materials that we would find in the U.S. Coast Guard guide license, or that 6-pack license. And I think the reason we're leaning towards that is a lot of our guides that work reservoirs already have this license. So to be fair to them, they could show up with this license and it would eliminate their need to get the other things. And then what we would do is take, someone that's fishing a trout tailwater may not even use a boat, potentially. So we would go through that USGC guide license checklist and pick out the things that we think are important. So someone would have to show up showing that they had first aid, CPR, or their boater safety card. There's a drug test system, there's physicals, all the things that are with that Coast Guard license to show that they've done those things, and they could contribute that instead of the Coast Guard license, which would probably be cheaper in the end for that person. Well, that's pretty exhaustive list of things we could do for qualification for sure. The cost on this is a little different. Right now you're talking about, we still get the same amount for the license, but the guide, he or she, will have to pay out again, that number could vary, but hold on a second. That $350 might be an average of fees for getting physicals, drug tests, registering for classes and things to get certified. And then, like I said, if they get insurance, and they would have to, maybe if it was decided that way, that would be another $1,000. So the cost of the license goes up pretty well, and Tennessee Wildlife still gets $65,000. Now, to administer that, we know we're going to have filing paperwork, and our sales office was able to give me an estimate of what that would cost. About $16 a transaction, we lose about $2,000. So the more qualifying license actually brings us in a little less money for sure off the top. But it may be worth it because there are additional benefits. Again, we get $63,000 if my estimates of how many guides that are going to be out there is accurate. Other states that have these licenses have.
They would be required to, I would hope, to be able to produce that license for their clients. So I think that there may be some changes in revenue there also.
That was actually one of the requirements that the insurance policy application had, is that they must make sure they're applying and their clients supplied or comply with all rules. So, yeah, that's a good point.
Does anybody have any questions on the commission? In the audience, is there any questions concerning this?
I'll go ahead and say something here. Why would you have a license but a guide license? I'm not necessarily against, everybody knows that I do some guiding, but why would you have a guide license that only applied to tailwaters rather than have a statewide guide license for anybody that's fishing?
It was indicated that where we're going to have problems is because we're going to lose federal money for our trout cold water fisheries, and we've got to start taking an action to try to recover some of that money in case we have to take over the cold water hatcheries ourselves and pay for that. So people, especially in Upper East Tennessee, the majority of guides that are using our fisheries for their commercial fishing is from out of state, and they're not contributing anything to help produce the trout. Each trout that we currently, with our even federal aid, costs us $3 a piece. And so we're trying to find ways to try to recover some of that lost income.
But couldn't you recover some of that lost income by having a bass fishing guide be required to have that same license?
We're not losing funding, if I understand it right, from our warm water fishery hatcheries. Is that correct? It's all cold water. So we're trying to be as less intrusive as we can and not do it statewide. That's why we're trying to go with just our tailwater, cold water fishery.
I mean, I'm all for less intrusion. I'm sure you know that, but I mean, we're still stocking other waters, you know, like the Smoky Mountains, other places that aren't tailwaters, but they're still trout, so they're still taking from the resources. But those guides wouldn't then be required to help deal with those lost funds, would they?
Well, some of the tailwaters referred to are, I think, did we include the pigeon or did we not? I can't remember.
We did not.
We did not. I mean, we're trying to work this out. We're trying to put it out there for the public to comment. We're not making any decision today. We're just trying, and that's what we're trying to.
And I'm just bringing up those points, but also some trout are stocked in lakes. You know, Dale Hollow, for example. I mean, there are trout in there, so. But
it's be hard to enforce. We can enforce a certain section of water for all species of fish more so than we could for a reservoir, because if we come out and say you fish with trout, the answer is going to be no. We're fishing for bass. So.
Right. Well. Exactly, but for a guide, though, you know, it would be pretty simple. And I think, you know, I know a lot of guides myself, and I was wondering when this came up at the last meeting, you know, why you just didn't use the commercial fishing license. And I think you would have, you know, very little objection, especially from residents, if you went with option 2 there, and you required all guides to contribute, you know, rather than just targeting the tailwater guides on, you know, a few lakes and reservoirs.
Well, I think it's. Do you have something to say, Director Carter?
Yes, sir, if you don't mind.
just as a little response to that, Mr. Ratermann, one of the reasons that this came up is that the guides began to ask for the license, and it was the fishing guides that were asking.
I was one person that asked.
And I know I'm not speaking for the commission here, but I think one of the reasons that the commission began to look at this one more than the others is because it was a request from the user and from the guide saying this is something we'd like to have, and they laid out a number of reasons, and I'm sure you're familiar with most of them. Back early in my career, and I don't remember when it stopped, we did have a guide license, and it applied to hunters. That over a time period was eventually done away with, and I don't remember there ever being a time there might have been a fishing license or a guide license. If anybody is as old as me, you can tell me, but I don't remember that anyway. But in any case, mainly I want to just make the point that this was more in response to people asking for it than the agency going out and trying to solicit another regulation, as you said, and also because the trout hatchery thing that we're looking into perhaps losing, that was another alternative way of looking into that. I was responsible for administering that Coast Guard license for a number of years. I'm very familiar with that, and I know how that started and the intricacies that got involved in trying to put that license together. It's not one that the agency ever had the authority to enforce because it was a federal license, but we did help people get it because when people had to travel either to New Orleans or to Memphis from anywhere in the state to take the test, we stepped up and said, we'll do that, we'll give that free, no charge, we'll take that part off the person. So not to just keep going in a circle. The primary reasons for looking at the fishing side of it rather than all encompassing was because it was a request.